I have felt my fragility most when I moved to a new country, didn't really speak the language, and was all alone without knowing anybody.
I have felt my own fragility most when I was ill myself and my manager had to send me home. Despite trying, I wasn't fit to look after my patients.
I have felt my own fragility most when people have said or done things which have hurt me or made me feel scared.
I feel my fragility the most when in my job I see sickness and death, and when medical science has reached its limit and there's nothing more I can do, because after all our bodies are not made to last forever. This humbles me and makes me turn to the one who is the source of all life.
So when have you felt your fragility most? That sense of vulnerability that comes when you realise that you're just not as in control as you thought you were. Life throws those moments towards us. Often, doesn't it? And perhaps recently, more often than many of us have ever experienced before. My name's Matt, I'm one of the pastors of Eden Baptist Church in Cambridge, and we're going to be thinking a little bit over the next few minutes about what God has to say in response to that question. When we feel our own vulnerability, our own fragility, what should we do with that? Mike, one of our church members, is going to think about that from Psalm 103, verses 8 to 18, which I'm going to read for us just now. Psalm 103, verses 8 to 18. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. He will not always accuse, nor will he harbour his anger forever. He does not treat us as our sins deserve, or repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we're formed. He remembers that we are dust. The life of mortals is like grass. They flourish like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it, and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. But from everlasting to everlasting, the Lord's love is with those who fear him, and his righteousness with their children's children, with those who keep his covenant and remember to obey his precepts. Now over to Mike as we think about that a little bit more.
Let me just start by asking you a question. How do you feel about chicks, baby birds? How do they make you feel? Maybe you think adorable, maybe you think cute and cuddly. Well, I've been watching some clips from the film Bug's Life, and I can't show them to you because of copyright, but just imagine that you're a little ant or a grasshopper, and so to you a bird looks like this. And imagine that bird reaches over with its beak and picks you up, and it shows you its cute, cuddly little chicks. And then it lowers you down towards them so that they look like this, and then this. How do you feel about chicks now? Scary, right? And the reason that Bug's Life is what I've been thinking about is that you realise in that film that from an ant's perspective, being small makes everything terrifying. Even raindrops are these huge kind of bombs that are being hurled down at you. And that's natural, because naturally we are scared of things that are bigger than us, stronger than us, because we can't control them. I remember somebody explaining to me what it was like to be surfing and to get sucked under a massive wave. And he said, you're just kind of curled up in a ball being tumbled over and over and over, and you can't do anything. You just have to hold your breath and hope that the wave spits you out before you run out of air. And he said, that is fear. And as I've been talking to friends, a common theme that just keeps coming up as we talk about this crisis is that it's sort of made us realise how small and how fragile we actually are. For all of us, I think coronavirus has wrecked some of our plans, things that we thought we had under control, but it turns out we don't. Or did you notice when Boris Johnson was doing his announcement a couple of weeks ago that he kept having to say if? Time and again he was saying this is conditional. We can't make any promises. We don't quite know what's going to happen. When did politicians ever say if that much? When did they ever admit that they don't know what's going to happen, that they can't control how it's going to turn out? We're all realising, I think, that we're a lot more like those ants than we thought. We're small and we're fragile and we're surrounded by things that are bigger than us and out of our control. And on a deeper level, I think, it also makes us realise that our very lives are fragile. I talked to one friend who just said, it makes you realise, doesn't it? My wife might die this week. I might die this week. And it reminded me of a book I read a while ago by a guy who'd been diagnosed with incurable cancer. And he said something really interesting. He said, before my cancer was diagnosed, I knew that someday I would die, but I didn't know when. After the diagnosis, I knew that someday I would die, but I didn't know when. Only now I knew it acutely. And I wonder if the daily death count on the news hasn't done something quite similar for a lot of us. It's sort of brought to the front of our consciousness something that we always knew was true. Something that was actually expressed very powerfully so long ago in that psalm that we've been looking at. It says, if you look in verse 15 and 16, the life of mortals is like grass. They flourish like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. It's a very powerful image of our situation, isn't it? We're like little fragile flowers. They are beautiful, but they are fragile, and even something so light as air can rip them to shreds, and eventually something will, and they will be completely gone and quickly forgotten. We are mortal and fragile. And I think on some deep level that scares us. It's probably not at the forefront of our consciousness all the time, but I think we have a kind of deep, slower burn version of that feeling of being tumbled over and over and over in the wave, that deep fear of realising that we are not in control. So what do we do with our fragility? Well, I want to suggest two things I think we normally do and then one alternative. And the first thing I think we tend to do is just ignore it. We do that through distraction. Because when you think about it, why don't we normally think and talk about these things? Because it's not like anything fundamental has changed. It's not that humanity caught mortality off a bat in a meat market in Wuhan province a couple of months ago. The death rate among humans has always been 100%. But we don't normally think about death because we don't want to. And so we distract ourselves. There's a famous quote from the philosopher Blaise Pascal where he says, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Maybe if you're in my generation or younger, you can relate to the fact that for me, when I find myself sat in a room alone, I can't cope with it. I get my phone out. Maybe if you're a bit older and wiser, you might even notice that a weird number of us, kind of in my generation or younger, have had to admit at some point to having dropped our phones down the toilet. Maybe you've noticed that, and you think, why? Is it that we're all getting urgent phone calls at the least convenient possible moment? I don't think it is. It's just that if we have to sit in a room alone for whatever reason, we instinctively get our phones out. There's this huge industry, Netflix, YouTube, Instagram, making vast amounts of money out of offering to numb us and distract us from ourselves and from the big issues of our existence that we just don't want to face up to. Or the other thing we do is we insulate ourselves against the fact of death, and we do that through delusion. Now, when you think about it like this, it's almost as if as individuals and as a society, we're engaged all of the time in this huge project to make ourselves feel in control. We're these fragile little flowers, but we surround ourselves with calendars and to-do lists and 5-year plans so that we'll feel like we've got a grip on our future. Or another massive industry, cosmetics and fashion, devoted to our desire to look like people who are never going to get old or die. We are desperate to look immortal. And it also just feels like, as a society, it's almost as if we've agreed that we will never speak about death unless we absolutely have to. We are flowers, desperately trying to convince ourselves that we are castles, exhausting ourselves by trying to persuade ourselves that we are impregnable fortresses. And it feels like what the daily death count on the news has done is just smash a daily battering ram into those fortifications that we've built up in our minds to protect us from the fact that we're mortal. And even now, we're finding ways to sort of insulate ourselves against it. I was reading a brilliant article by a guy called Yuval Noah Harari, and he was warning against the risk of putting blind faith in our scientists and our medical professionals. He says this: the question on the lips of everybody, from the White House through Wall Street, all the way to the balconies of Italy, is, when will the vaccine be ready? When, not if. We are fragile flowers, desperately convincing ourselves that we are castles. And I think, to be honest, that is exhausting. It's hard work trying to keep that slow burn fear at bay. It's like we're sort of running around with sandbags trying to stop the tide from coming in. So the question is there an alternative? Is there a way to respond to our fragility that is less exhausting, less delusional? Well, I'm going to suggest we could embrace it. We could do that through trust. Because it seems like the obvious alternative to persuading ourselves that we are in control is to admit that we're small and we're fragile, and to entrust ourselves to someone or something bigger. And to place ourselves into the hands of someone or something that actually is in control. But even as I say that, I can hear the objection in myself: isn't that even more frightening? To surrender yourself into the hands of some vast personal power that isn't you and you can't control or manipulate. Isn't that far more frightening than just ignoring it or insulating ourselves against it and getting on with things? And I think my answer to that would be that completely depends on who you're trusting. And what are they like? So the question we're thinking about is, if there is a God who is inviting us to embrace our fragility and trust him, what is he like? And maybe in the midst of this kind of crisis, when you think of God, he's a kind of cruel despot who's just toying with us down here. Or maybe you think of a harsh headmaster staring at us with his beady little eyes, waiting to just punish us if we fail to live up to his exacting standards. But God isn't like that. The God that we meet in Jesus, the God we find in the Bible, the God who is there, he's very different. And we're just going to think about two things that psalm tells us about what God is like, and how knowing those things liberates us to embrace our fragility and trust him. And the first one is that God is compassionate. Let me just read the brilliant poetry of verses 13 and 14 again. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust. And there's two very powerful ideas there. One, this image of him as a loving father, and the other is this idea that he remembers that we are dust. And that's very evocative. It almost acts as a kind of hyperlink to this big theme that runs through the whole Bible of us as humans being dust. But what does that mean? What does it mean to say we are dust? Well, first and foremost, it means that our life is a gift. It's not something that we have in ourselves. It's something that we receive. Because we are made of, essentially, dust, of stuff. You know, our bodies are 65% water and 18% carbon, and then only a tiny amount of anything else. So, you know, we're basically made of a big puddle and then 15 pence worth of carbon, enough to fill a big box of pencils. And yet, here we are, singing and laughing and loving each other. Now, we are puddles and pencils brought miraculously to life by the breath of God. But as well as that, this idea of being dust is a warning. It means that we are mortal. You know, we know the famous phrases, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. From dust you are, and to dust you will return. So it reminds us that we're mortal, but it also points to why we are mortal. Why is it that we must return to the dust? And the truth is that that's because we have all received this incredible, precious gift of life and then ignored the one who gave it to us. You know, we do all the things that we were talking about before. We ignore him. We distract ourselves so that we don't even have to think about where all of this came from. And we insulate ourselves against him. And we do that through all kinds of delusions, these ideas that we tell ourselves, you know, that he's not there, or that it doesn't matter if he is, or that we don't need him, or that if he is there, we'd probably be good enough for him anyway. You know, we receive this precious gift, and then we turn a cold shoulder to the loving giver. And we do with the gift whatever we want. And just look at what we do with it as well. You know, I was talking to my friend about this the other day, and I asked her, what do you think? If we humans, as we are now, were immortal, would that be a good thing? And she thought for a second and then said, to be honest, I can't think of anything worse. We don't deserve to live forever. To get our heads around that, let me just illustrate with a made-up story, based on that image of the kind of loving father that we've seen in the psalm already. Imagine that there's a father with a son, and the father runs this family business, and he employs loads of family members and others. He's a very generous employer, he pays good wages, and every Christmas he sends them all this wonderful Christmas hamper full of gifts. And when his son comes of age on his birthday, he shares everything with him. He signs him up so he has access to all of the accounts. And then a couple of weeks later, the son siphons off a huge chunk of the pension fund and runs away, moves abroad, cuts off all contact. How should the father respond? You know, what should he do? Should he keep paying his wages and sending him the Christmas presents as if nothing has happened? I mean, could he look the others in the eye if he did? But imagine that the father does this. Every Christmas, he still sends him this wonderful hamper full of good gifts. And on it, there's a little note that says, "Love from Dad. I can't keep doing this forever. Please come home." And the truth is, that is what God is doing right now. You know, if you're alive and you're not yet trusting him and embracing him, then what he's doing is just what that father is doing. You know, every breath we take is a gift. We are dust. We're just dust. And yet here we are, singing and laughing and loving each other. It's all a gift. And every single breath you take comes with a little note attached that says, "Love from God. I can't keep doing this forever. Please come home." So that's what it means that we are dust. But what does this psalm tell us about what God is like if we do come home? How does he treat us when we're at home? And it says that he has compassion on us. And to have compassion means to share someone's pain because you care that much. And the thing is, we know that God actually is like that because he has done that in Jesus. You see, in Jesus, God, in the person of his Son, took a human nature himself so that he could share our pain. He actually knows our fragile, dusty life from the inside. You know, he genuinely understands our fears, our struggles, our deepest pain. God even knows what it's like to die. But it's actually even better than that, because God didn't just come to suffer with us in Jesus. He came to suffer for us, to rescue us from the worst, deepest possible agony by taking that instead of us in our place. Because all of us have basically told God to leave us alone. But Jesus, who never said that to his Father, who didn't deserve it at all, has tasted for us what it's like if God ultimately says yes to that request. Now, as Jesus hung on the cross, he experienced the ultimate darkness of being separated from God and from every good thing that comes from him. And he did it so that we would never have to fear that. You know, if we will embrace him, if we will trust him, then we never have to fear that ourselves, because Jesus has gone through hell and back for us to make us safe, to give us peace. That is compassion. That's how much God cares. And the other thing that we see in these verses is that God's love is everlasting. Let me just read the first bit of verse 17 again, because we've just thought about how kind of fragile and mortal we are, and then in stark contrast to that you get verse 17. But from everlasting to everlasting, the Lord's love is with those who fear him. You know, God is love. And he is stronger than anything else we might ever be afraid of, even death itself. And he has proved that. He's proved it in history, in front of humanity's very eyes, when Jesus rose from the dead. Because Jesus on the cross kind of took onto his own shoulders the crushing weight of the ultimate death that we all deserve. And then he defeated it. As he died, it looked as if death was destroying him, but in reality he was destroying death. And now he will never die again. And so we know that his love for us will never die. And that means that if we trust him, if we embrace him, we can actually relax. We can rest. We can have peace. We can embrace our fragility and our mortality because we know that his love is everlasting and it will never fail us. That we're kind of placing ourselves in his hands, and we know that his hands will hold us and they won't let go. And he will take us through physical death, out the other side, into a renewed, healed world, where we'll be able to enjoy overflowing life forever, enjoying every good gift and infinitely enjoying the giver himself. And to come back to the whole idea of being like flowers, if we embrace him and we trust him, we're not so much like frightened flowers, we're more like trees planted by streams of water. Because we're still completely dependent on him. You know, I love the way that a tree can't just go off to forage some food for itself. It has to just stay where it is and wait for God to give it everything it needs. We're utterly dependent on him. But we're not afraid, because we are deeply, solidly rooted in his everlasting, life-giving love. So, yes, we are fragile, we are mortal, we are not in control. But that is okay. Because if we'll embrace him, then we are held, we are rooted, we are loved by the one who actually is in control. And he has compassion on us, and his love will last forever. How good is that? So I'm just going to pray in a minute, and then we're going to sing again, just praising and enjoying him for what he's like and what he's done for us. And so you can either join in as I pray and as we sing together, or you might want to take the opportunity just to reflect and ask yourself, do I believe that God is really like this? And if I do, am I willing to embrace him and entrust myself to him? Let's pray for a second. Father, we praise you that you have compassion on us and that your love lasts forever. Help us to trust you and to find peace in you. Amen.
So what are you going to do with your own fragility? When the vulnerability rises, when you realise you're not as impregnable as you thought you were, what will you do with that? It may be that you are still feeling very sceptical after listening in to the last 20 minutes or so. Thank you for sticking with us. If you still have questions, we'd encourage you, please keep asking them. Find out more about this claim that actually the route to responding rightly to our fragility is to embrace it and turn towards the one who made us, our God, who has come to us in the Lord Jesus. Perhaps you'd like to ask those questions to Christian friends, or indeed you could ask us at Eden by using the email address on the screen, questions@eden-cambridge.org. Or it may be that you'd like to find out a little bit more. Again, please make use of that email address on the screen and ask your questions, but perhaps also pick up a copy of one of the accounts of Jesus' life. Matthew, Mark, Luke or John. Grab a copy, read through it, and see what you make of the claims that Jesus makes. That he is the one that we can trust with all of our vulnerability, all of our fragility, that we can come to him. If you'd like a copy free of charge of one of those accounts of Jesus' life, then please do use that email address to ask for one. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.